The mansion was bright, not dark. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, reflecting off the polished marble floors. Staff members moved quietly through the hallways, finishing their afternoon duties. Outside, expensive cars rested peacefully in the driveway. Everything looked normal, but inside the kitchen, something was wrong. A soft, broken sob filled the air. Lorenzo De Luca paused in the hallway when he heard it. He had been reviewing business reports on his phone, walking with his usual calm confidence. In this house, nothing happened without his knowledge, especially not crying. The sound came again. Small, strained, trying to be hidden. He stepped into the kitchen. Near the large marble island stood Sofia Marino. Her back was turned, shoulders trembling as she wiped her face quickly with the edge of her sleeve. She hadn't noticed him yet. Sofia had worked in the mansion for 3 months. She was quiet, respectful, and careful with every task she handled. She never caused trouble, never spoke more than necessary. She survived by staying invisible. But today she failed. When she finally turned and saw Lorenzo standing there, her eyes widened in shock. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, lowering her gaze. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Lorenzo didn't respond right away. He observed. Her breathing was uneven. Her fingers were slightly shaking. And when she reached to adjust her sleeve, he saw it. A dark red mark around her wrist. Not an accident. Not clumsiness. A grip. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Without saying a word, Lorenzo walked to the kitchen door and closed it firmly. The click of the lock was clear. Sofia froze. He didn't shout. He didn't look angry. He simply walked closer, stopping a few feet away from her. "Look at me," he said calmly. She hesitated, then slowly lifted her eyes. They were filled with fear, not of him, but of something else. "Who hurt you?" he asked. His voice was steady, controlled, but heavy. "No one," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Lorenzo had built his reputation by reading people. He knew when someone was lying. He knew when someone was afraid. And right now, she was both. "In my house," he said quietly, "no one cries for no reason." Her lips trembled. "It's nothing, sir. Just a personal matter." He stepped slightly closer, his gaze dropping briefly to her wrist. "That mark," he said, "is not personal. It's violence." Silence filled the kitchen. The distant sound of staff working outside the door felt far away now. Sofia tried to stay strong. She wasn't used to someone asking about her pain. She handled things alone. That was safer. But something about his calm voice made it harder to lie. Finally, her composure broke. "His name is Marco," she whispered. Lorenzo didn't interrupt. "He's a debt collector," she continued softly. "Years ago, my father borrowed money. After he passed away, Marco said the debt became mine." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "At first, he just demanded money. I gave him what I could from my salary. But it's never enough." Her voice grew weaker. "Today, he waited outside the staff entrance. He grabbed me. He said next time he won't be patient." Lorenzo's expression remained unreadable, but his silence grew colder. "You didn't tell anyone?" he asked. She shook her head. "I didn't want to involve you. I know you have important matters. I didn't want to cause problems." A slight shift crossed his face at that sentence. "You work here," he said slowly. "You are part of this house." Sofia lowered her eyes again. "I can handle it. I just need time." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Time. In his world, time was power, and power decided who survived. He walked back toward the door and unlocked it. The tension didn't disappear. It changed. "Go back to work," he said calmly. She blinked in confusion. "Sir," his gaze met hers one last time. "No one will touch you again." There was no anger in his voice. No dramatic promise. Just certainty. Sofia felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Relief. As she slowly stepped out of the kitchen, her hands were still shaking, but not the same way as before. Behind her, Lorenzo remained standing in the quiet room. Marco had made a mistake. He had placed his hands on someone inside Lorenzo's walls. And in this city, that kind of mistake was never ignored. The next morning, nothing in the mansion looked different. Staff moved through the halls as usual. Phones rang. Meetings were scheduled. Business continued. But inside Lorenzo De Luca's office, something had already changed. He sat behind his large wooden desk, fingers lightly resting on the surface. In front of him stood two of his most trusted men. Marco Vitali, Lorenzo said calmly. One of the men nodded. Local debt collector. Small operation. Known for intimidation. Violent? Lorenzo asked. Yes. Lorenzo leaned back, slightly in his chair. His expression was relaxed, but his eyes were cold. Bring him, he said. No shouting. No threats. Just 2 words. And that was enough. Meanwhile, downstairs in the kitchen, Sofia Marino tried to focus on her work. She chopped vegetables carefully, keeping her hands steady. But her mind was racing. He said no one would touch you again. Those words repeated in her head. She didn't know what that meant. She didn't know what he planned to do. And that uncertainty scared her almost as much as Marco did. Around noon, one of the guards approached her quietly. Mr. De Luca wants to see you. Her heart skipped. She wiped her hands and followed him upstairs. Lorenzo's office felt larger than usual. He stood near the window, looking out at the city skyline. Without turning around, he spoke. Is he still contacting you? Sofia hesitated. He sent a message this morning. Threat? Yes. Lorenzo nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. He won't send another. The calmness in his voice made her nervous. Sir, please, she said softly. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. That made him turn. For the first time, his expression shifted slightly. Not angry, not soft, but thoughtful. This is not because of you, he said. It is because someone believed he could use fear inside my territory. She didn't fully understand his world, but she understood one thing. Marco had crossed a line. That evening, Marco Vitali was escorted into a private warehouse owned by Lorenzo's company. He looked confused more than afraid, until he saw who was waiting. Lorenzo stood calmly in the center of the room. No weapons visible, no raised voices, just silence. Do you know who I am? Lorenzo asked. Marco swallowed. Yes. And yet, Lorenzo continued, you place your hands on someone who works in my home. Marco quickly shook his head. It's just business. A family debt. Lorenzo took one slow step forward. She is not your business. The air in the warehouse felt heavy. Marco tried to defend himself. I didn't know she was under your protection. That is your mistake, Lorenzo replied. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't emotional. And that made it worse. In this city, Lorenzo said, there are rules. You collect debts. You threaten those who owe you. But you do not touch what belongs under my roof. Marco's confidence faded completely. What do you want? He asked nervously. Lorenzo looked at him for a long moment. I want you to disappear from her life, he said. No calls. No messages. No shadows outside her door. And if I refuse? A faint, almost invisible smile touched Lorenzo's lips. You won't. The message was clear. There are consequences for disobedience. Marco nodded quickly. It won't happen again. Lorenzo stepped aside. See that it doesn't. His men escorted Marco out. No dramatic violence. No chaos. Just a warning powerful enough to shake a man's future. The next few days passed quietly. No messages. No threats. No strange cars waiting near the staff entrance. Sofia began to breathe easier. One afternoon, while arranging dishes in the kitchen, she sensed someone behind her again. She turned. Lorenzo stood there, hands behind his back. He hasn't contacted you? He asked. No, she replied. And he won't. There was something different in her expression this time. Not fear, not confusion. Gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. Lorenzo studied her face carefully, making sure the tension he had seen before was gone. You are safe here, he said. 3 simple words. But in his world, they meant everything. Sofia nodded, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest, a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. As Lorenzo walked out of the kitchen, the staff continued their duties as usual. The mansion looked the same. The city looked the same. But somewhere out there, a man had learned a lesson. And everyone who heard about it would understand one thing clearly. Inside Lorenzo De Luca's walls, fear belonged to him and no one else. For a few days, everything felt normal again. No calls, no threats, no strange faces waiting outside the gates. Sofia Marino slowly began to breathe easier. She moved through the kitchen without constantly checking the windows. Her hands no longer trembled while holding a knife. For the first time in weeks, she felt like the fear had finally ended. But peace in Lorenzo's world was rarely permanent. It started with something small. A guard walked into the kitchen one afternoon holding a simple brown envelope. "This came for you," he said. Sofia frowned. No one sent her letters. Her fingers felt cold the moment she saw her name written on the front. The handwriting was messy but familiar. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words. "You can't hide." Her heart dropped. The room suddenly felt smaller. Before she could even react, a calm voice spoke behind her. "Who sent it?" She turned slowly and saw Lorenzo De Luca standing in the doorway. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. She handed him the paper without speaking. He read it once. His face didn't change, but something in the air shifted. "He was told to disappear," Lorenzo said quietly. Sofia swallowed. "Maybe he hasn't." Lorenzo folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "He has," he replied, "which means this is not about distance. It was about ego." That evening, Lorenzo sat in his office while his men reported back. "He left the city 2 days ago," one of them said. "Different name, different apartment, no direct contact. Then how did this reach my house?" Lorenzo asked calmly. Silence filled the room. Someone was helping Marco, or Marco believed he was untouchable. Lorenzo stood from his chair. "Find out who delivered it," he said, "and find out who he's speaking to." His tone remained steady, but everyone in the room understood something important. This was no longer a warning. This was a challenge. Meanwhile, Sofia tried to continue her routine, but fear had returned like a shadow. She kept replaying the words in her mind. "You can't hide." Later that night, as she stepped outside, briefly near the staff entrance, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She stared at the screen, frozen. It rang once, then stopped. A message appeared. She opened it slowly. A photo, taken from across the street. The mansion gates clearly visible. Her breathing became uneven. He was watching. Before panic could fully take over, she sensed someone behind her. "Lorenzo." He gently took the phone from her hand and studied the image. His expression remained controlled, but his jaw tightened slightly. "He wants attention," Lorenzo said. "He said he left," Sofia whispered. "He did," Lorenzo replied calmly. "But men like him don't leave quietly. They leave anger behind." She looked at him, fear visible in her eyes. "I don't want this to become worse." "It already has," he answered. There was no anger in his voice, just certainty. Inside his office later that night, Lorenzo made a call himself. Marco answered on the second ring. "You were warned," Lorenzo said calmly. Marco tried to sound confident. "I left the city. I haven't touched her. You sent a message." "It was nothing." There was a short pause. "It was everything," Lorenzo replied. The line went silent. Marco suddenly understood something he hadn't before. Distance did not equal safety. Back at the mansion, Sofia stood near the window of the kitchen, staring outside as guards quietly increased their patrol. "Why is he doing this?" she asked softly when Lorenzo entered. "Because he believes fear gives him power," Lorenzo said. "And you?" His eyes met hers. "I don't allow others to use fear inside my territory." The difference between them was simple. Marco threatened to feel strong. Lorenzo protected to remain in control. The next morning, new information arrived. Marco hadn't truly run away. He had been contacting someone in the city, asking questions, watching from distance. He wasn't finished. And now, neither was Lorenzo. Sofia sensed the change immediately. The staff moved more carefully. The guards were more alert. Something was building. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about a debt anymore. It was about pride, respect, power. And Marco had made the worst mistake possible. He had mistaken patience for weakness. Standing alone in his office, looking over the city skyline, Lorenzo made a quiet decision. The next move wouldn't be a warning. It would be a lesson. The city moved as it always did. Traffic filled the streets. Businesses opened their doors. People lived their lives without knowing that somewhere behind the scenes, a decision had already been made. Inside his office, Lorenzo De Luca stood silently, looking over the skyline. His face was calm, almost thoughtful, but the calmness was dangerous. Marco had sent letters, pictures, messages, not to hurt Sofia physically, but to prove he wasn't afraid. That was the real problem. In Lorenzo's world, fear had a structure. It had rules. When someone ignored those rules, the balance broke, and balance had to be restored. That afternoon, one of Lorenzo's most trusted men entered the office. "We found him," he said. Lorenzo didn't turn around. "Where?" "Industrial district. Abandoned storage facility. He's meeting someone tonight." Lorenzo nodded once. "No police," he added calmly. "No noise." The man understood immediately. This would not be public. This would be precise. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Sofia Marino tried to focus on preparing dinner. She could feel the tension in the house. The guard spoke less. The staff moved carefully. Something was happening, even if no one said it out loud. When Lorenzo stepped into the kitchen, she noticed something different in his eyes. Not anger. Finality. "You should leave early today," he said. She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because by tomorrow," he replied calmly, "this will be finished." Her heart tightened. "Please," she said softly, "don't do something extreme." He looked at her carefully. "Extreme is what he's trying to provoke," Lorenzo answered. "I'm simply correcting a mistake." There was no cruelty in his tone, only control. That night, inside a quiet storage building on the edge of the city, Marco Vitali paced nervously. He had agreed to meet a contact who promised protection, someone who claimed they could stand up to Lorenzo's influence. But as minutes passed, the building felt colder. The large metal door behind him suddenly shut. Marco turned sharply. Lorenzo stepped forward from the shadows, not rushed, not dramatic, just present. Marco's confidence disappeared instantly. "You don't understand," Marco began quickly. "It was just intimidation. I never planned to harm her." Lorenzo walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "You sent messages after you were warned," he said calmly. Marco swallowed. "I needed leverage." The word hung in the air. Leverage. As if Sofia were a business tool. Lorenzo stopped just a few feet away. "She is not leverage," he said quietly. There was no shouting, no visible weapon, but the silence itself felt heavy. "I left the city," Marco insisted. "I didn't come back." "You never left the problem," Lorenzo replied. Marco looked around nervously. There were men near the exits. No easy escape. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice shaking now. Lorenzo studied him carefully. "I want you to understand something clearly," he said. "You were given a chance to walk away peacefully." Marco stayed silent. "You chose pride instead." A long pause followed. Then Lorenzo gave a simple instruction to his men. "Make sure he cannot contact her again." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it carried weight. Marco's protests echoed briefly in the warehouse before the doors closed again. No gunshots. No chaos spilling into the streets. Just a controlled removal of a threat. The next morning, the city woke up to quiet rumors. Marco Vitali had disappeared. His small operation shut down overnight. His known associates suddenly unreachable. His apartment emptied. No one knew details. But everyone understood. He had crossed the wrong line. Back at the mansion, Sofia stood near the kitchen window, unaware of the full extent of what had happened. When Lorenzo entered, she looked at him anxiously. "It's done," he said simply. She searched his face for signs of violence, of anger. She found none. "He won't contact you again," Lorenzo added. A deep breath left her chest, one she felt like she had been holding for weeks. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. "This house remains safe," he said. For the first time, she truly believed it. As Lorenzo walked away, the mansion returned to its usual rhythm. Meetings resumed. Guards rotated shifts. Business continued. But beneath the surface, a message had spread across the city. Lorenzo De Luca had shown restraint once. He would not show it twice. And anyone who considered using fear as leverage inside his walls would remember what happened to the last man who tried. The city was quiet about Marco's disappearance. No headlines. No investigations that lasted more than a day. Just whispers. People who once worked with him suddenly stopped answering calls. His small office in the industrial district was locked. His name slowly faded from conversations. But inside the mansion, life continued. Sofia Marino moved through the kitchen with a calm she hadn't felt in months. There were no more unknown numbers. No envelopes. No shadows outside the gates. Still, something inside her felt unsettled. Because she understood one thing clearly. Problems in Lorenzo's world never disappeared without a cost. One afternoon, while arranging files in his office, Lorenzo De Luca received unexpected news. Marco wasn't working alone, one of his men reported. Lorenzo looked up slowly. Explain. He owed money to a larger group. When he disappeared, it caused tension. They think you interfered with their business. Lorenzo's expression didn't change. And did I? He asked calmly. The man hesitated. Indirectly, Lorenzo stood from his chair and adjusted his cufflinks. Then they are free to misunderstand. He wasn't concerned about rumors. He was concerned about moves. That evening, a black car parked across from the mansion for several minutes before driving away. It didn't go unnoticed. Security tightened immediately. Inside the kitchen, Sofia sensed the shift again. More guards, more silence, more tension. When Lorenzo entered, she could read it on his face. "This isn't over, is it?" she asked quietly. "It rarely is," he replied. Her stomach tightened. "Is this because of me?" He stopped walking and looked directly at her. "No," he said firmly. "This is because some men think they can test boundaries." She wanted to believe him. But guilt has a way of growing even when it isn't invited. Later that night, Lorenzo attended a private meeting with representatives of a larger organization Marco had once worked under. The room was elegant, polite, civil, but beneath the surface, it was a battlefield. "You removed one of our collectors," one of the men said calmly. "He violated a rule," Lorenzo replied. "A rule we didn't agree on." "You didn't need to," Lorenzo said evenly. "It was inside my territory." Silence followed. The tension wasn't loud, it was strategic. "You're sending a message," the man across the table observed. "Yes," Lorenzo answered without hesitation. "And what is that message?" "That protection is not weakness." No one raised their voice, but everyone understood. Lorenzo wasn't apologizing. He was drawing a line. Back at the mansion, Sofia couldn't sleep. She stood near the window in the staff quarters, staring at the city lights. Her mind replayed everything that had happened since that day in the kitchen. One bruise, one question, who hurt you? And now, powerful men were discussing territory because of it. The next morning, she gathered her courage and requested to speak with Lorenzo. When she entered his office, he looked slightly surprised. "I want to leave," she said softly. The words hung heavy in the air. His expression hardened slightly. "What?" "Because this is escalating," she explained. "I don't want to be the reason more problems start. If I go somewhere else, it ends." Lorenzo walked around his desk slowly. "You believe leaving removes the cause," he said. "Yes." He stopped in front of her. "You are not the cause," he replied firmly. "The cause is men who think fear is a tool." She looked down. "But if I wasn't here?" "If you weren't here," he interrupted calmly, "they would test something else." His voice softened slightly, not emotional but honest. "You leaving would not protect you," he said. "It would only show them pressure works." Sofia finally looked up at him. "And you can handle this?" A faint, confident look appeared in his eyes. "I already am." Later that day, word spread quietly through the city. The larger organization had backed down. No public agreement. No announcement. Just silence. They understood something important. Lorenzo wasn't expanding territory. He was defending it. And pushing further would cost them more than it was worth. That evening, the mansion felt lighter again. Guards returned to normal rotation. The black car never returned. Sofia stood in the kitchen, preparing coffee when Lorenzo entered. "It's settled," he said. She studied his face carefully. "Completely?" "Yes." Relief filled her chest. But this time it wasn't mixed with fear. It was understanding. "Why go this far?" she asked quietly. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment before answering. "In this world," he said, "if I protect someone halfway, I create doubt. Doubt invites challenge." He paused. "I don't protect halfway." Sofia realized then that what happened wasn't just about her safety. It was about his principles, his rules, and the cost of breaking them. As Lorenzo walked out of the kitchen, the mansion returned to its steady rhythm once again. But one thing had changed permanently. Everyone in the city now knew. If you threaten someone under Lorenzo De Luca's roof, you don't just face consequences. You become an example. Weeks passed, and for the first time since everything began, the mansion felt truly calm. No unfamiliar cars across the street. No silent threats hiding behind messages. No tense meetings behind closed doors. Sofia Marino moved through her daily routine with quiet confidence. The kitchen felt like a workplace again, not a place where fear had once cornered her. But something inside her had changed. She no longer felt invisible, and Lorenzo had noticed. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his office, Lorenzo De Luca paused when he heard soft laughter echoing faintly from downstairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was rare. He walked toward the kitchen. Sofia was speaking with another staff member, a small smile on her face. For a moment, she looked lighter, as if a weight had finally been removed from her shoulders. When she noticed Lorenzo, she immediately straightened. "Sorry, sir," she said politely. He glanced at the other staff member, who quickly excused himself. Lorenzo looked back at Sofia. "You don't need to apologize for laughing," he said calmly. A small, surprised expression crossed her face. "I wasn't sure if it was appropriate," she admitted. "This house is not a prison," he replied. There was no coldness in his tone this time, just clarity. Later that evening, Sofia approached him again, but this time, not out of fear. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. He closed the file he was reading and gave her his full attention. "You already did." "No." She shook her head gently. "Not for stopping Marco. For believing me." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Lorenzo studied her carefully. "In my world," he said slowly, "people lie often. But fear has a pattern. I recognized it." She looked down for a moment before asking quietly, "And if I hadn't worked here?" The question lingered in the air. Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. "Then someone else would have eventually stepped in," he said. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true, because not everyone had the power or the will to stand against men like Marco. Days later, an unexpected opportunity arrived. One of Lorenzo's business partners mentioned opening a new legal hospitality branch. Hotels, restaurants, legitimate operations, expanding into new districts. He needed someone trustworthy to manage internal operations. Someone detail-oriented, responsible, discreet. Lorenzo thought of Sofia. That evening, he called her into his office. "I have a proposal for you," he said. She looked confused. "Sir, you are capable of more than cleaning kitchens," he stated plainly. Her eyes widened slightly. "I want you to manage staff operations at one of my new establishments." She stared at him, unsure if she heard correctly. "I don't have experience." "You have discipline," he replied, "and integrity. Experience can be taught." Silence filled the room. "You're giving me a promotion?" she asked softly. "I'm giving you a future," Lorenzo corrected. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Not because she was afraid, but because no one had ever offered her something beyond survival. "Why?" she finally asked. Lorenzo leaned back slightly. "Because strength deserves opportunity," he said. "And because I prefer to invest in people who stand back up after fear." Her eyes shimmered, not with tears of pain this time, but something else. Hope. Months later, the new establishment opened successfully. Sofia stood confidently overseeing operations, dressed professionally, giving instructions with calm authority. She had grown, not because she was rescued, but because someone chose to protect without controlling. Meanwhile, Lorenzo watched from a distance during the opening night event. One of his associates approached him. "You trust her a lot," the man observed. "I do," Lorenzo replied. "That's unusual for you." Lorenzo's gaze remained steady. "Protection is temporary," he said quietly. "Empowerment lasts." The associate nodded, understanding more than the words themselves. Across the room, Sofia caught Lorenzo's eye briefly. She didn't lower her gaze this time. She smiled confidently, not as a frightened maid, not as someone hiding from danger, but as someone who had stepped into her own strength. And in that silent exchange, something unspoken settled between them. Not romance, not ownership, respect. The city still feared Lorenzo De Luca. His name still carried weight. But inside his walls, fear no longer ruled alone. Because sometimes, true power isn't shown by how harshly you punish enemies. It's shown by how firmly you protect, and how wisely you build what comes after.